Do you like dogs? I do too. That's why today's episode is brought to you by BarkBox.com. Get one free extra month of BarkBox at www.getbarkbox.com/paratruth.
Christian and non-Christian paranormal investigators. They have two different views, and it seems as if neither of them can ever agree on anything. So what happens when a mainstream view of the paranormal crosses paths with the Christian view? Something epic. This is Paratruth Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a brand new episode of Paratruth Radio. My name is Eric.
And I'm Justin.
And ghost stories are found across the earth, from first world to third world countries and everything in between. How those stories are shaped is determined by both time and the people relating them. Today, we discuss some of those stories with our guest, Paul Fitz-George.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, for those of you listening at paratruthradio.com, Paranormal UK Radio Network, TMV Cafe, and Fringe Radio Network, let's get ready to expose some lies.
Paul Fitz-George has been an author, investigator, and paranormal enthusiast for over 20 years. He currently resides in Richmondshire, North Yorkshire, and has a diploma in parapsychology as well as psychic counseling. He is a member of the Association of the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena and is here with us today to discuss his website, English Ghosts, and many of the stories that are on it.
Paul, welcome to Paratruth Radio. How are you doing this evening?
I'm fine, thanks, Justin. I'm just sitting here browsing through some stuff for the sake of my memory and trying to remember how ghosts are created and what sort of ghosts there are.
I have that problem every day, and I'm 36 years old. So.
Well, it's good to keep your hand in.
So, first question I wanted to get started with you is, what got you into doing research in the paranormal?
I suppose when I look back, because I noticed you asked yourself one of your blogs, well, how did I get into paranormal? And for me, I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, supernatural things like that. When you're a kid, you see the Dracula films, and ooh, that's good. Like that famous one, The Devil Rides Out, the Dennis Wheatley one, which is this one. You're both far too young to remember that, but it's a good film. And I think the one that got me really into it was I was watching. This is going back to about 40 years. That's my Mac telling me what time it is. Thanks. About 40 years ago, there was a BBC drama called The Stone Tape with Jane Asher. Now that one was just the story is these scientists go to this haunted site to see what this ghost is. It's a maid that's seen running down the stairs in a Victorian house, and she falls to her death. But they didn't know what made her fall to her death. And what they do there, I think Brian Blessed, Morgan's at God, Gordon's alive, from that film. He's in it as well, a very young Brian Blessed. And what they do is they take some sonic blasters to blast the area with sound so they can expose the ghost. But what they actually do is they begin to erase the latest ghost, and they began to go back in time, and older and older ghosts appear until this Neolithic ghost appears and kills them all. But that's the gist of the story. But it's based on this idea that the surroundings actually record crisis events or cyclic ghosts or something like that, and the actual area, the stones, the buildings that record the ghost. And I thought it was a really good explanation of why we see these things, and also it's also an understanding of why the older the ghost, the less likely you are to see as time passes by. We had, when the First World War, we had a spate of First World War ghosts. Then the Second World War, we have Second World War ghosts, and then depending on the crisis. So that began to intrigue me, in short. And it really took off when I went to live in Whitby. in North Yorkshire, which is, of course, as all Bram Stoker fans will know, is where Bram Stoker had strokey, beardy thoughts and put together the Dracula story. And I was working in the harbour department as a collector of dues for the harbour, and my salary was pants. I was earning very little because the local government doesn't pay much. And I thought to myself, this is a very interesting town, and it's just, Whitby's a place, in fact, I was there last weekend. It's awash with ghost stories and the supernatural. I mean, it's got about 2,500 years, 3,000 years of history, so, that's a praise. Right. So I thought to myself, I'll do two things. I'll enjoy myself, and I might make some money. So I started a ghost walk. So I used to do my job during the day, and I used to totter across the harbour bridge to the other side where the old town is, have a board up saying Supernatural Whitby Walk, and I used to go around the town with groups of people at night telling ghost stories. It was great fun, made a lot of cash, made a lot of friends, and learned a lot of stories.
Cool. Well, now, speaking of just stories in general, I've noticed in my research that there are very similar ghost stories told around the world. However, the myths tend to differ depending on the location of the story's origin. Now, do you think that is a difference in the story, that the difference in the stories are cultural, or can it simply be explained away as like the telephone effect, where one person tells a story, then the recipient alters it slightly as they tell someone else?
I'm thinking that bit in Wayne's World too, where he says that and someone tells someone else, and then someone tells someone else, and then it multiplies and multiplies. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, there are some vernacular ghosts. I think for instance, Lapland, they have these strange Nordic ghosts that you don't really hear about anywhere else. But then there's a common one. I noticed one of your T-shirts has it on the Hellhound, or the Gittrish. Right? We call they call it the Gittrish here, or in Yorkshire, it's also known as the Padfoot or the Skriker, and the Hellhound can be familiar to Britain. You can find it in Eastern Europe as well, and of course Stoker uses it in Dracula because that's what Dracula turns into and comes out the boat. So you will find variations. Funnily enough, I'm just studying sort of the Mesoamerican era now, with the Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Incas, but you don't hear much about ghost stories there. Funnily enough, because obviously they couldn't write. They didn't have they did have a simple form of writing, but it wasn't as prolific as the writings in ancient Greece or Rome and that. So ghost stories wise, you don't hear it, but I'm sure there's the Chupacabra, isn't there? That's the only one I can think off the top of my head in South America. The Chupacabra, it's that one comes to light. But I think you'll find some recurring stories and some more odder ones that are particular, I say, to the Sami people in way up in the north, in the Arctic. They seem to have a strange. There was one that I don't know if you got that TV series Black Lake over there. It was, you probably wonder what it was. Okay, it wasn't that great. They mentioned this Sami ghost. I thought, I've never heard of one of them. I sort of sprung to mind when I was that, and I was going to look into it. But to answer your question, Eric, there's common ghosts that you'll find all over the world of a similar nature. And I'm just thinking, because Japan, for instance, is a place where they love ghost stories.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And they can have quite extraordinary ones, quite convoluted. I'm going, and then what happened? And I thought, that's a very complicated ghost story. I was going, usually big dog comes, scares the hell out of you, run. You run. In Japan, it's, there was this person, and then he went to that. What? It gets very complicated, but very interesting as well. So I suppose that there's the common story that either a dog, the deceased, dead warrior, that, and then there's the vernacular ones that you get specific ones in the Sami land up in the Arctic or in Japan or China, and good old Chupacabra down in South America.
Okay.
All right.
So through all of the stories that you've compiled, out of the areas that you've done research for the stories and everything, what area has been, in your opinion, the most haunted?
What era or point in time or area?
Just the area of any of those ghost stories that you compiled. Like, was there a specific story that seemed like it was a much bigger haunting than others, or was it that entire area that you did the books on that it was just seemed like really haunted.
The two places I concentrated on was Whitby Ghost Book was obviously Whitby.
Right.
Whitby was it's a wash with ghosts. It just is. It's one of those places. I mean, Whitby's a place that goes back. It goes back to Celt times. Then you have the Romans. Then you have the Anglo-Saxons. Then you have the Vikings. Then you have the Normans. Then you have, it just stacks up. And of course, what happens then is you get a synthesis of all the folklore, because all these different cultures that come in bring with it their own folklore. For instance, Whitby, for instance, there's the church, the tops and Merries at the top, but that has the Kirk of Vassal, or Church of Vassal, where there's a ghost of a creature that appears in the window because it's the protective ghost thing. But that's Nordic, that's a Scandinavian one that's come in. So Whitby's probably was a good place for me to write a lot of stories about, because there are a lot of stories. Okay. And I was lucky enough to work in the harbour department, because I was working with all these guys that worked in the harbour, and they knew so many stories themselves because their fathers had seen things. The other area, of course, I covered was in the other book was the West End Ghost Book. Now, London, yes, it's awash with ghosts. It's been there for millennia, but the West End's a particularly interesting place because that's one of the oldest parts of London. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you think it starts basically from Tower Hill as far as Fleet Street, really, because that's where London was. So everything else was just fields up to a couple of hundred years ago, but because the metropolitan area got bigger and bigger. But you get loads of ghosts there from like John Donne, the famous Tudor the doctor. Ask not for whom the bell tolls and tolls to thee. Well, that was one of his poems that he put together. He has a ghostly experience there. You've got everything from succubus and incubus, that sort of soul-sucking things that live in Green Park, to and prolific World War I ghosts, because of all the men that came and went to the theatre and then went to the front and died. You get them returning to the theatre. You'd be seen walking up the Colosseum Theatre to go and sit down because they had a crisis. That's what's called a crisis apparition. They die suddenly, so the spirit suddenly appears back and somewhere familiar to them. So those were the two areas that I concentrated on. I mean, hell, I'd love to go elsewhere, and I'm sure if you go through Europe, there's towns full of ghosts. But these are the two places which were accessible to me from where I am. Although it always impresses me that America seems to have so many ghosts. When you think it's a relatively, once a young country, we're talking about from Tudor times, the 16th century. Mm-hmm. But there's so many ghost stories in America. But you're by Jingle, they're being hard at it over there, sort of. Because I'm used to listening about the ghosts, like Tiresias in the Odyssey, Space Father, and that. The Greek mythology is full of ghosts, so is the Roman mythology. But I thought, by Jingle, America, wall-to-wall ghosts. And it was just in the blink of an eye.
Well, if you think about it, we've had way more death here compared to some areas with different
into that much
crimes and that sort of thing. But
on top of that, you think of what type of melting pot that America is. And so we have people from other countries coming in, bringing their own stories, and then they're transformed into American stories. They get altered and whatnot. So
Scandinavians, we're here because in Britain, we're not we're not a hybrid. We are a mongrel country. We are made up of so many nationalities over the years, and I say we've just absorbed the Saxon mythology, the Viking mythology, and Roman. Because where I am now, I'm in a place called Catterick, but it was Catriconium. It was one of the main garrison towns for the wall, the imperial border behind me. The border, the Hadrian's Wall, which is the northernmost border of the Roman Empire, is about 60 miles north of me from here. And where I am now was just awash with Roman sites. There was a fort, and then of course what happens? The Saxons built over that, and then the Vikings built over that. So we have this huge sort of mishmash. But as with yourselves, you've got the Scandinavians, you have the Eastern European folklore that comes into it, and of course you've got the Native American Indian folklore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is that you think you'd hear more about Indian, ghosts from the Indian area. I don't know, maybe you do or don't. from a sort of psychic story point of view.
Yeah, it's weird because in America, you would think you would hear a lot more about Native American ghost lore, and we actually don't hear too much about ghost lore itself. We hear more about cryptids and things like that from the Native American side of stuff. Not that there isn't ghosts. But yeah, it is kind of weird that we don't hear more of that. I don't know if that has something to do with just the transition of everyone coming from Europe and striking war against Native Americans and how everything just kind of shifted. But
I suppose there's the tie, as I said before. Some of my stories cover World War I ghosts. Some of them cover the Civil War ghosts, like Captain Brown Bush from Bagdell. He hasn't been seen for a long, long time. And as I say, the further we get from the main apparition, although there is one I think was seen quite recently, there was the Roman auxiliaries. So in York, which is just about 60 miles from here in York, which was called Eboracum in Roman history. That's where Constantine the Great was crowned emperor. Founded Constantinople. I mean, funny enough, I was over in Turkey a couple of weeks back in Istanbul, and of course, this is where here in England, this is where Constantine was made emperor, and where Septimius Severus, the emperor, died in York 60 miles ago. But these Roman auxiliaries walk in the basement of the old treasurer's house in York. But the interesting thing is they're only seen from the knee upwards. They're in full armor, shields and that. Like Ben-Hur, they're all marching out to some load of hairy Saxons that are causing trouble down the road. But they're walking at knee length because what they're doing is they're actually walking at the right level for them, because that's the level. The actual road is below that building in the basement, and it's about 3 foot below the area we're walking. So they're marching out. They apparently look very tired and haggard because they're having a hard time. The empire's imploding at that point, about 360. And they're the auxiliaries, the actual Romano-British that are left, because the Romans have all departed back to the empires that implode.
Well, now, there's a lot of paranormal investigators around the world who are out there trying to catch an image of a ghost, video, EVP, et cetera, and the main reason for that is to figure out what happens after death. Is there life after death? What are ghosts? What are the origins? In your research, I know you've done some research to, I guess, somewhat determine what ghosts actually are or where they come from. Can you go into a little bit of that for us?
The ghosts, you break them down into various categories. There's the crisis apparition. The crisis apparition, as I say, remember the First World War ghosts I was talking about, where suddenly somebody dies, somebody else. A typical one of that, it's a pretty gory story, but it's the one where the mother and daughter are walking past a place in Whitby by the post office, and they see a soldier with no head. And it goes, he's actually just died out at the front. Is seen back in the town. In fact, I walked past the post office on Sunday, the same place where his body or his figure was seen by the post office. And that's what's known as a crisis apparition. Again, the same one where the young lieutenant walks down the Colosseum Theatre in London. He's walking back into his seat at the theatre because he suddenly dies and he suddenly appears back there. So that would be the crisis apparition. Your cyclic recording ghost is the ghost that occurs the same time of the year, the same place, the same time, exactly every year, and that's cyclic recording ghosts. You've got the Marian apparitions, which are Virgin Mary. That's a bit of a hybrid, that one. And yes, I suppose in really there are various points of origin of different ghosts, but they all have a sort of basis on an event, really. I suppose is that sounding too simple? A quick browse of the old book here, because I always keep the poltergeist. Poltergeist, that's just a rather strange, although that's usually centered around younger kids. There's a sort of age that can be more specific to. You got the weird and wonderful, like the doppelganger or the double person, which is known in Whitby as the waft, which is yourself. So you, Justin, would walk into a shop. What's your local town?
I live in Bismarck.
Right, a good German name there. You walk into Bismarck, like walk in your local sort of sweetie shop, and suddenly you see yourself. And of course, that is a ghost of you. But the terrible thing about the doppelganger, obviously, is the doppelganger is a soul stealer. So if you saw yourself at the end of the shop, you have to do something very, very quickly to save yourself, which is to challenge it. So you get these strange ghosts that are sort of peculiar to German folklore. Like I say, the doppelganger. Restless spirits are the usual ones that need to be put to rest. They've just died suddenly. I keep thinking, is there a similarity between the crisis apparition and the restless spirit? But the restless spirit is there's some reason why it just will not rest, and you have to do X, Y, Z. But that's the various types of ghosts that I'm familiar with in my sort of researches. And I usually try, when I write about them, and put, the traditional deathbed apparition where somebody sees something at death. But I usually try and, rather than just say a ghost story, I usually try and give a reason for it. Like the famous one, of course, is the one in the British Museum. There's several ghosts there. And of course, this ghost about them. If you ever go to London, and you get, or your listeners, if you get on at Holborn and head towards Tottenham Court Road on the Piccadilly and Central line, there is still an old station left, completely intact, halfway across. But it used to be called British Museum, but it got taken out of the line about 100 years ago now. Well, actually, no, about 80 years ago, because they resited the stations. But on this station has been seen the ghost of an Egyptian mummy. And the driver goes, an Egyptian mummy. Oh, absolutely. An Egyptian princess apparently shrieks down the tunnels because the thing you got there is you've got, remember we were talking about the stone tape, you've got a building chock full of memories and people and mummies and God knows what else. Naturally, you'd expect something strange to be going on in the environs because simple presence of all these artifacts of ancient times.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Oh, yeah. One thing that you had brought up is there's different types, and one that you had said is the doppelganger, which I don't know if you know this, but actually Abraham Lincoln had seen his doppelganger before he was assassinated, and I found that like super fascinating. But one that is closer to your area, which Eric and I have done a show on before, is the Banshee. Have you ever come across any stories of the Banshee?
The Banshee tends to be more across the water in the island. That's to Moda. Although the nearest we get in this area was a Banshee by a name was called Junior Biggersdale, and this is a shrieking, horrible witch stroke sprite that lived in just outside Whitby. There's a little stream that goes down by I forget what the estate their home is, but there's a place there. And of course, it's interesting how. Remember, I think Eric, you were saying that how stories can be transmitted from one person to another, like a telephone things. Well, Junior Biggersdale, the story about her is this chap goes to the pub, has lots and lots of drink, and says, I am going to go and tease Junior Biggersdale because I'm feeling butch and tough and all that sort of. So he gets on his horse, clumps over to this this wood where she's supposed to live, and says, Junior Biggersdale, I call you, you're all wind and woos or whatever. Let's just say he says something of a less than nice nature. And she takes exception to this and begins to chase him. So when he sees that, he suddenly sobers up, gets in his horse and starts doing the cowboy bit to try and get him. And of course, there's this sort of legend trait, if you like, about that witches or banshees that can't crush, or vampires can't crush running water. Right. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So now he manages to jump with his horse across the water, but just as he jumps, she catches up and cuts his horse in two, and he lands, fortunately, on the other side of the stream, on the front half of the horse, and she's gnashing away at the poor horse's back. But the thing that, when I used to tell that story, the thing that struck me was it reminds me of another story. What story does it remind you of? Any particular story? And the English or British folklore?
Headless Horseman? It's kind of similar.
It's similar to Robbie Burns. You know Robbie Burns?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
Cutty Sark. He does exactly the same. He goes to tease this witch Cutty Sark, and she chases him. I mean, I think Malcolm Arnold, the composer, did a piece of music about the whole thing, and she chases him, and exactly the same thing. She goes to cut him, but he manages to get across the other side. But his horse is lucky; it just gets his tail cut off. The one down here gets cut in half. But you see, we are 120 miles away from Dumfries, where Robbie Burns, because I used to live up that way. Robbie Burns actually lived and wrote these stories and heard about them. So there's obviously that piece of folklore there that's transmitted its way down to here. And these are all related to the Banshee, which is when you did your research, was it mostly in Ireland you found it?
Ireland,
located?
part of Scotland. Actually, there are folklore of Banshees here in America, but from what we could tell, maybe that was from the Irish migrating to America and that sort of thing.
The Irish, the Scots, basically, I was born in Glasgow actually myself, so I forget this right. I think the Irish invaded Scotland, or the Scots invaded Ireland, and they kept on invading each other for a long time.
Yeah.
This is before the Romans, in fact. I think the Romans thought, I've had enough of this, mate. Let them get on with it, because it's just good. And so you get a very close connection between the two, Irish and Scottish. A lot of the folklore is very, very. Although you don't get leprechauns in Scotland, because nobody gives away money in Scotland.
My wife is part Scottish, and that's one of the common things I hear is the Scottish are very, very stingy with their money.
Mind you, the Yorkshiremen are just as good. They're very good at that. I think in Yorkshire they have this saying, "Ne'er give out for nought. If that does give out, give it to thy sen." Idea of keeping his wife happy, keep her hungry, barefoot, and pregnant. That's Yorkshireman for you.
Well, now, okay, so we brought up the Banshee, and you actually mentioned leprechauns, and so this gets us into the an idea of the classification of spirits. And obviously, when we talk about ghosts or someone mentions ghosts, we think human in general. But then, of course, we see through lore demonic entities, the Banshee, which is sometimes considered something other than human. Where in your research do you find that like demonic entities or the jinn and things like that tend to be classified as, or what are they considered for their origins and whatnot?
Yeah, there's one. I was just fingering through the old things. The incubus. Have you ever heard of the incubus?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the incubus and the succubus. That's an interesting one. Green Park in London is where that. I mean, classification-wise, how long's a piece of string? Where do you start? Where do you finish? But that was an interesting one, the incubus and the succubus, because this succubus. I think. Well, I'm just trying to remember which one's the male and one's the other.
Incubus is male, succubus is female.
Yeah.
That's it. The succubus, obviously, this one in Green Park used to prey on tramps underneath trees. But there was an interesting fact that the monastic orders used to have, the monks used to be cleared up. They used to be, mourning and saying they were dreaming about it. And there was thought that they were just making it up so they could have naughty relationships with people. That succubus came to me last night, Bishop, and I don't know what happened, but it was not the little girl down the corner. Absolutely not. It was a succubus, and she was all over me. So you get this sort of, good excuse. What a you get these demonic, as you say, Eric, you get these demonic ones. I mean, you get the same, just plain animal ghosts. I mean, that Grim or Kirk of Arsel, which was either the cat or in some cases a donkey, for God's sake, was seen in the window as the protective guardian of the church, but it's a ghost of an animal. And because my wife and I, Rosie, she's big into horses. We think animals are just as much, have got just as much of a soul as the rest of us. So you get these ghosts of animal forms, and you get the various demonic ones, and you get the witches and whatever, and you get the people. So classification-wise, it's a hard one. I suppose some of there's going to be an encyclopedia to tell you what's what.
Right.
But I tend to take the stories as I see them. I know, for instance, what about the one about the bosun's chair in Whitby, where there used to be this bar in what used to be an old sail loft. I mean, Whitby's, well, a lot of the ships that went to America were built in Whitby. The Whitby Collier Cats that Captain Cook sailed on, they were transports. And the chap mentions, who was the marine supervisor that worked for me, he used to look after this bar. And one night he was in by himself, just changing some of the beer kegs round, and he saw this chair. There were bosun's chairs by the bar because it was a nautical bar. And just seeing it begin to go back and forward, and get bigger and bigger. And of course he legged it, he ran away. But what was that? And basically it was the invisible form of a ghost. So I suppose classification-wise, it varies on the apparition, really, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So do you still get people giving you ghost stories after you did the books, saying, "Oh, hey, this guy's written a book about this"?
When I was doing my walks, Justin, that did happen. The most interesting one, which I thought was quite good, was the chap said, "Oh, I like the stories, blah blah blah." I said, "Who?" He said, "I want to tell you one." I said, "Oh, well," because I always like to hear stories because it increases my knowledge and data of it. Yep. Mm-hmm. He used to work at a factory in Leeds. Now, Leeds is a metropolitan city here, just down about 60 miles down the road in Yorkshire. You're one of the biggest cities in the UK. And he worked in a factory, and he finished his work, he used to go out the front at night, just go home. And what happened is, over the years, they changed the front of the factory, because it used to be an old gatekeeper's hut at the front and a fence, and the men would come out and they'd check out and then go out the fence. But they changed it to a simple gate and a pass system, like an electronic pass, to pass in and pass out. So he was walking out one night, and as he walked out, when you walk out, you're walking and you have something on your mind, and it sort of takes up all your thinking space, and you're just the motions to get home, or whatever. So he walked out. As he walked out, he came to this old gatekeeper's hut, and he said, old Fred was there and said, "Oh, good night, Charlie." He said, "Oh, good night, Fred. I'll see you in the morning." And they kept on walking. And he walked for about 300-400 yards. And before he stopped in his tracks, he said, "Hang on, Fred's dead." And he suddenly realised he'd walked through what had been the entrance 10 years before. And old Fred, the gatekeeper, had been there at his gatekeeping post. But the gate was now an electronic gate and a brand new, newish modern frontage. But he walked right through what had been the entrance and said good night to Fred. And he said, I couldn't understand it. He said, I'd actually seen the old guy in his hut and the old entrance, but I hadn't taken note of it because I had this thing on my mind and walked out. So I don't know how you class that, but it's almost like going back in time. He's gone out and he's gone through what was there years before. Mm-hmm. Wasn't there anymore. And you find some, occasionally see, for instance, we were watching Medium tonight with, I forget what the name of the actress is, the Mrs. Dubois. And it was a similar story to that, where she had gone back in time in one of her stories and being perfectly normal, she thought, but it wasn't, because the whole thing wasn't there anymore. This was the future and that was the past, which I thought was quite interesting. And I still haven't worked out how you get that into a story yet.
Well, now, do you think when it comes to spirits making connections with the living, do you think that's something that the living has to open the door to, or do you think it's just like, okay, for example, this friend that you were just talking about, he had something else completely different on his mind, and it may have kind of opened him up to this possibility of something reaching through. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think some people are naturally inclined to be able to receive messages, visions, pictures, with that. I say my wife, she keeps having premonitions, which she tells me about after the event. And I said, you told me about that before. I wouldn't be sitting here on fire. Funny enough, I knew this was going to happen. I thought, well, that's a lot good, isn't it? Like yesterday, I wouldn't be, lying in bullets and whatever that. But there are some people that basically are just tuned into it a lot better than me. I'm not. This is my curse. I write and just strokey beard and all that sort of business. I don't have any experiences at all. I have not had any supernatural, paranormal experience myself. But there's so many people I know that do. And can actually. My father always said my mother was a witch, but I don't think maybe she's cheeky. But she actually did have premonitions. She could actually think of something before and tell me about it before it happened. But there are people who can actually sense things. A friend of mine, when she was a young girl, she was about 10 years old, sitting in the front room, and she saw this tablecloth rise off the table and then slowly end. And she got this smell, and it was a grandmother. She could smell her grandmother, but her grandmother had been dead for 10, 20 years. Well, actually, no, she couldn't have been 10. She must have been dead for about 5 years. Otherwise, she wouldn't have remembered them, would she? Got to get your time spans right. But she felt that her grandmother was actually in the room with her. She could smell her. She could, and the sense of it. But she could sense that sort of thing. Whereas people like me, I don't know how you two chats fare, but I'm dead in the water. I just don't get any signals. I get to write about them and I get to investigate them, but people I know have a lot more tuned into them, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've come across several people in the paranormal field that do the research for stuff, but they've never had a single experience in their life. So, I mean, it's probably more common than you think. They do the research, but they're like, I can't tell you one way or the other because it's never happened to me. I'm just telling you what I've researched. So one thing that I wanted to bring up to both of you guys, because it's actually something I heard on somebody else's show, is the concept of maybe ghosts being a glimpse into the past rather than it being the actual soul of a person or something, because we think of time as linear, but a lot of quantum physics people are saying time isn't linear. It's more than that. So what are your thoughts on it actually being more of a time travel or a time loop kind of a thing compared to like dead spirits?
Funny enough, funny you should say that. I was watching a program today about the Incas, the lords, the clouds, the creatures, things like that. Mm-hmm. Their concept of time was quite different to the Western one. They saw time as 3 strands running parallel. There was the present, the past, and the future, and they're all running concurrently. So you could, in fact, what you're doing now could affect or be part of the past. Or it's quite hard one to get your head around. Right. You see the diagram. I thought, it's very interesting. But how does it work? You think my past person really hates you, but at present I really like it. No, that can't. They had a different concept of time. They had this three line parallelism that was running along it. And yes, I suppose going back to the stone tape with Jane Asher, this business of it being a recording, it's actually on a tape. It'd be interesting. The thing is that the question we had to ask ourselves, and what does anybody see a future ghost?
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm just trying to think of an instance where people. Although I think I probably did hear many years ago one story about people seeing the future. Do we see future ghosts? Do we see images of the future? Mm-hmm. I suppose that would be what would you call that? Seeing something in the future, premonition, I suppose. But because you think how finite is time? How much time will humanity go forward?
Right.
Which begs the question: if we're not seeing anything, does this mean we're all going to get zapped a week next Tuesday?
Eric, what about you?
Going back to the other time I said we see less and less of the older ghosts now.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but most of my stories tend to be, there's one or two that go back a while, but they are actually folklore that's been written. Most of the ghosts seem to be about max that are seen 400 years, 400 or 500 years. The occasional one renegade like the Romans and York.
Right, yeah.
Does that then mean that time fades and the apparition's strength or power of transmission or whatever fades with it? And again, why don't we see the future ghost? That would be an interesting concept, because see, there's a lot of trouble actually could tell us what we're going to be.
Eric, what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to fathom the idea of seeing past or future ghosts, especially when you start thinking of intelligent hauntings. Mm-hmm. You and I have done investigations, Justin, where we ask questions and we receive an answer immediately. We see it on TV, knocks, and things like that. And so I guess at that point you have to question, like, okay, unless there is a future ghost who's already seen you ask that question before and is therefore responding,
right?
Then the ghost itself has to actually be there in reality as an intelligent haunting. So I don't know. I don't know if I really believe that concept. I don't know if I can really fathom it right now, but I'd love to see more information and research on it, though. That's for sure.
As Paul said, it's hard to wrap your mind around any of it, really.
Yeah. Because it begs the question of time travel. Like, I'm 62, so I remember when we used big phones. Indeed, I had a life then. I could actually put the phone down and just bugger off. Right. You got phones. You got to think, everybody can contact me anytime. It's hell. But I suppose they're thinking about the future and time travel, because I like H.G. Wells, for instance, his concept of being able to travel in time. Mm-hmm. Why don't we see them? Or does that mean it's not going to be time travel? Or does that mean they can't come back, or whatever? Or does it mean, are we would they affect the time stream so we can't see them? I don't know. But it'd be interesting, because then we'd have to invent time travel, and then that would completely change history, because then from that point on they'd be able to come back. I'll stop there.
It's really confusing. I watch a TV show called The Legends of Tomorrow, and they're time travelers. And so they're constantly going back and forth in the past and future, but they can't let the past know that they're from the future, and the future can't really know that they're from the past. And so they're constantly on this struggle about how it is you time travel and yet allow the world to continue its existence without the influence of the time traveler itself. And it is just by far the most difficult thing to understand sometimes, as you're sitting there watching it. But
I mean, that was I quite like that series, Librarians, who seem to be able to.
Oh yeah.
Although they were less inclined to go forward, but they were more inclined to go back. In travel, there's been several series actually that like Star Trek, the Prime Directive. I tell you, they've messed up so many time streams, mate. So I wonder when.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I like even the old one links up with the new one, and I thought, that's a good connection, because you're getting Star Trek Next Generation. Because I see, but one of the guys, the chap that did the West End narrated the West End Ghost book for me, the Ghost book Time Winters. He's actually been in Star Trek. He was a Cardassian apparently. In episode The Wounded. And I said to him, with this time streams, don't worry about it, Paul. It's all very nice. Okay. Because I like the way that the Next Generation actually interfaces with the older one, and then they can actually interface with the one before anyway.
Yeah.
I'm looping as I speak.
All right. Well, Paul, unfortunately, we are at the end of the episode here. So what I want to do is just give you a moment to tell people where they can find you, where they can find your books, and, of course, any other info you'd like to share. Sure.
Well, your wonderful listeners want to get my mighty works. They're all available on audible.com and on Amazon. The West End Ghost book, that's narrated by, I said, Time Winters, US actor. Been in a lot of the things, Columbo, I'd say Cardassian, whatever. And he did the Whitby Ghost book. And the other two Christmas customs would be When Dracula Met the Jabberwocky, which is about Charles Dickens and Lewis Carroll in Whitby. That's narrated by Patrina Kingham. She's an ex-barrister, would you believe, an ex-lawyer. Moved across into narration. You can check me out my website with all the details are on there on www.englishghosts.com. And by all means, get on there. There's a contact form, or you can see my email address on LinkedIn. Send me an email. I'm more than happy to answer the questions any of your listeners may have.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Paul, I'm going to have you hold on for just a moment. But, folks, again, this is Paul Fitz-George. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. We will be right back to Paratruth Radio after this break.
Hey, Parafans. Do I have a deal for you? The people over at Loot Crate are giving our listeners a 10% savings on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Loot Crate is this awesome monthly mystery smorgasbord of a package that you get stuffed with different things from different genres, such as Zelda, Fallout, Harry Potter, and so many more. So to get your 10% savings, make sure you go to trylootcrate.com/Paratruth. Again, that's trylootcrate.com/Paratruth and enter Bridge 10 to get 10% savings on any new subscription.
A creature emerges from his slumber, only to be told he is a griffin with the name Achilles. The twisted mind of Dr. York Hampshire believed he could keep such a creature in a lab without consequences. However, bigger secrets are being revealed. What is this mad scientist doing with creatures and humans? The legendary Creatures Project The Griffin by Justin Conciliere, available now at Amazon.com. Get your copy today before the lights get turned off on this project.
Hey, this is Eric, and you're about to listen to the audio trailer of my short film, The Revealed, which is now streaming worldwide. Check it out at ericscareback.com, paratruthradio.com, and YouTube. The links are provided in the description of this episode.
Start from the beginning. When did it all begin?
Hello? When we were kids, at Old Grove Church.
This has led many scholars to question whether the God that we serve is truly omnipotent, omniscient, spiritual, or simply a New Age extraterrestrial, while others are led to question, are we truly alone in the universe?
So, these dreams,
They're different this time around.
All right, folks, welcome back to Paratruth Radio. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric.
And we were just talking to Paul Fitz-George about English ghosts, his two books, the Whitby Ghost Book and the West End Ghost Book. I don't know if I can say this about many of our guests, but couldn't stop laughing with talking to him, and then we have the video going for us, so we would see his facial expressions or his mannerisms, and it was just a fun time. So I hope you guys go check out EnglishGhosts.com. That's where he posts his blogs, his books, as well as you can find them, as he said, on Amazon and Audible. So anything pop up for you, like interesting wise, what he had to say?
I mean, we discussed a lot of things today, and I think some of it was familiar to us. Some of it were new concepts. The one thing that I find interesting was his idea about how some of these older spirits seem to fade away as time moves on or time moves forward. And it's something I never really thought about, because when you do think about the Roman Empire and you think about the many wars, we don't really hear about ghost stories or people currently seeing ghost phenomena, supernatural phenomena, based around those those Roman wars, or even the wars of the Bible. You know, we don't hear anything about it. Like, what happened to them? It just disappeared. And so, like, you know, why is it that these ghosts don't, from like biblical times, why do we not hear about these hauntings or see such things? Can it be that time really does fade, and therefore the presence of the spirits do as well? Which then, of course, brings up a secondary question, which kind of goes into what you brought up at the end there, the whole idea of time travel and timelines and stuff like that. If indeed, as time fades, the spirits do too, does that mean that the spirits themselves aren't really there and that they're just a figment of time? And that's why they're fading. Because it wouldn't really make sense that a spirit would lose its power over time. It's constantly gaining energy,
right?
As it feeds off, especially nowadays where there's more for a spirit to feed off of, more electronics, more whatever to get its juice. So
if that is really what's going on anyways, because
right.
But both concepts, what he brought up with sound would make sense. Sound eventually dissipates over time. So if the ghosts are nothing more than an echo, then it would make sense. Same thing with the time loop. If we're getting further and further away from that particular time line as we go on, we would see less and less of it. Right. So I think that those are two really cool concepts of it, because still today, doing the paranormal radios we have and paranormal research for almost 10 years now, we're still no closer to an answer than we were when we first started 10 years ago.
No. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you would think by now there'd be some type of evidence to really give us clear-cut, definitive answers to our questions. But alas, it is not there, which, of course, brings us yet again, or at least brings me, to the basis for Scripture, which is that there are certain things God isn't going to allow us to know until our own death. It's just, there's always those questions that are not going to be answered. The mystery.
Well, our friend Jim Harold, who's been doing it only a couple of years longer than we have, he's said the same thing. I have more questions than I have answers.
Yeah. Yep. And so it is in the way of the supernatural.
Oh, so much fun. So yeah, it's that's the end of the episode for the ghosts, guys. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Paul Fitz-George, and definitely, like I said when we came back from break, check out his website, EnglishGhosts.com, as well as his books. I think that he would really appreciate even just a conversation from you guys. Maybe you can share some of your ghost stories with him from the States, because as he said, his research has only been to those two areas because that's where he had concentrated mostly. So I do want to bring up again this week, if you guys haven't checked it out, check out paratruthradio.com. Check out the merchandise area where we've got our new T-shirts. As Paul had mentioned, we have 2 Hellhound T-shirts plus the one of ourselves and one of just our logo and what we're deeming the vintage logo of Paratruth Radio. So definitely check those out, and make sure you're checking out Paranormal UK Radio Network, TMV Cafe, as well as Fringe Radio Network and RadioPodcast.com. Do you have any closing words or thoughts or on anything?
No, I don't actually.
All right. So, all right, folks, that is it for the episode. Make sure you're checking out all of those great networks and checking out paratruthradio.com. If nothing else, just check what we have there, because we've got a bunch of great things. We've got our sponsors as well as the couple of blogs that we've done. And that is about it. So until next week, where you will hear us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.